Hello friends, this is Otz, and I'm tired of pretending it's not. And today I'm gonna very quickly go over what I think are the best builds for every killer. We'll cover some alternatives, and if you're new, we're also gonna go over what I think are the best starting builds and where you can go from there to quickly have some perks that will help you perform better with your killer. With that being said, every player is unique, so by all means, use your best judgment and take into consideration your own preferences and playstyle, and the information in this video will help you find whichever build is most effective and, more importantly, most fun for you. With that out of the way, we're going to do this extremely fast, and we'll begin with the Trapper. The Trapper is fairly unique in the sense that he's not a killer that always relies on his perks. You can sometimes win games very big just because your power the traps come in clutch and every survivor steps on them. In the situations, you can have a bad build or no build whatsoever, and you'll still win. However, you need to account for the other situations, bad maps with no grass, survivors right on top of you constantly, your traps being stepped on at the worst possible times, all of those situations where your power does nothing. Luckily, you don't have to choose. There are some builds that can help you when you're winning and also reduce the chances of you being in one of those situations and cover for your weaknesses. And this one that I'm presenting to you is pretty damn good. You want to run Corrupt Intervention. This will make the furthest gens get blocked, forcing survivors towards you. This is a really good thing. You want to set up just the bare minimum and immediately get into chase with survivors. Begin to grind down on the resources they have. If they have 6 loops that are safe, you will trap 1, you will trap 2, you will get rid of another pallet, and suddenly those 6 or 7 loops will turn into 1 or 2 safe ones. And you will constantly harass survivors into the ones that you've trapped or the ones that have no pallet left, where you'll be able to set a perimeter of traps next to each other and next to you, where they'll be most effective. Corrupt Intervention will also sometimes result in nice 3-gen strats that you'll take advantage of throughout the course of the game. The next perk also plays beautifully into this mindset. Every time you hit a non-obsession survivor, save the best for last will gain power more and more, and eventually you'll recover from your hits very, very quickly. This lets you deal with body blocking, with altruistic plays really, really well. And with many, many stacks to save the best for last, survivors will have less room of maneuver. Every time you hit them, you'll catch up to them very, very quickly, and you'll constantly keep dragging them back into your turf, into your perimeter of traps, as opposed to hitting them and watching them go across the entire map where you have no business following them towards. It goes without saying, if a survivor steps on a trap, hit them. If they're the obsession, grab them instead, and you'll save stacks to save the best for last. That's how you make this perk work. If you end up going to, say, an indoor map where there's absolutely no grass whatsoever, Corrupt and save the best for last will still make you an effective M1 basic attacking killer, even if you don't use your power a lot, which in and of itself can win you many, many games. On top of this, we're running the perk Pop Goes the Weasel. Other killers use this perk a bit more actively. With a Trapper, you have it as a bit of a backup. At the start of the game, if you have only 4 gens because the other 3 are blocked by Corrupt, you can use Pop to delay the first gens a bit, and later throughout the match, you can use it to keep fighting and keep contesting those gens that are in your perimeter, maybe a 3-gen near the end, so that you have a better chance to stall the game until someone steps on a trap and everything goes south, or somebody dies and you can suddenly use Save the Best for Last to overpower the remaining survivors. So it's more of a stability tool than a perk that you're constantly using at all times. I use these 3 perks on Trapper to get 50 wins in a row, and they really lend themselves quite consistently into favorable matches for you. Your 4th perk is completely up to you. I'm going to recommend Starstruck because in its current form, it's really, really powerful. Every time you pick up a survivor, everyone around you has to respect you and allow you to go into basement, allow you to go into your perimeter, whatever it is, and then be on their toes for the next 30 seconds or so. This can also allow you to create Snowball out of thin air and is really, really powerful. But by no means the only perk you could run. If you want to be more aware of where survivors are in relation to you, And when they're closing in on you at the start to stop setting traps, Whispers is a great choice. It will also help you later in the match to know where to go. Thrill and Tremors can also make Pop even more effective, and oddly enough, it's very effective on Trapper. It will give you a great idea of where survivors are, where you should go, and when you should not set up traps. With Corrupt Intervention, you're not going to be setting up a lot of traps near the start. You'll instead be looking into setting up traps mid-chase sometimes, and also in between chases, using the downtime when you hook a survivor and go elsewhere, or you down them before you pick them up. You'll be setting traps like that. You'll find a lot more success playing that way, and a lot more consistency. That being said, the Trapper is great with Hex builds. He can trap Hexes, especially running things like Devour and Undying. If you trap one of these two totems, eventually one of them will have to get cleansed because it can be transferred from one to another. One of them will have to be cleansed if you get enough hooks, and this can be really, really nasty. If you anticipate that survivors will be using maps, Haunt the Ground can fit into this or any other build really, really well. And if you're starting out completely and you have absolutely nothing to help you in terms of teachables, the build that you should be looking at is something such as Agitation, Brutal Strength, Whispers, and Noid. We've already talked about how Whispers helps you know when survivors are walking into you, helps you understand if you should be setting traps or not, and also helps you throughout the match to make sure that you're searching in the right places and not wasting your time. Noid is a great complement to your endgame ability to trap exit gates and be an endgame powerhouse, and helps you cover for the fact that you have no perks to slow down the game very much. With Brutal Strength, you'll help get pallets out of the way quicker and grind down those resources. And Agitation can help you bring survivors into the basement or into the place that you've already trapped. You should bring survivors to your traps, not put traps around your survivors. That way, they'll have a harder time predicting what you're doing, and it is a really good thing on Trapper. That being said, you don't like Whispers, you can run Bitter Murmur, which will give you information throughout the match, and at the end, so you can use Noid better. And if you don't like Brutal or Agitation, Sloppy Butcher is a decent replacement while you're waiting for better perks to come along. If you're actively going out of your way to get better perks on Trapper, I would recommend that you level up either Hag, Plague, or Trickster. With Hag, you can have a tremendously powerful Hex build going very, very quickly. With Plague, you can use Dark Devotion even, and especially Corrupt Intervention and Infectious Fright for some great effects. This is already a very solid build on Trapper. And Trickster, oddly enough, has perks that are all pretty damn good on Trapper that he can really take some real advantage of. So using them, you could also have a pretty baller build on your Trapper. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what to look out for. Next up is Wraith. Wraith is a killer of very definite and single strengths and many weaknesses. He is not a chasing killer, and I recommend that you never try to make him one. If you want to run perks that are actively useful when chasing survivors for a prolonged period of time, Brutal Strength, Beast of Prey, Enduring, you're very free to do that, but they will often give you lackluster results on Wraith. You should instead focus on the hit and run ambushing playstyle that he does best. You should be using your very now high speed lack of terror radius to quickly zone in on survivors that are unsuspecting, get a hit on them, maybe get another hit if they're not in a great spot, and otherwise keep rotating, keep them guessing, and be completely unpredictable. The perks that I would recommend for this endeavor would be Ruin, Search, Nurse's Calling, and Barbecue and Chili. With Ruin and Search, you have a bit of a plan A with a complementary plan B. As long as Ruin is up, anytime you make survivors step out of a gen, the gen will begin to regress at half the speed they do the gen. And when you down a survivor next to a gen, Search will steal progress from the gen, and it will work through Ruin. When Ruin sometimes gets cleansed, Search will still be a decent perk that by itself will make gens regress every now and then. These two perks will allow you to focus on chasing the survivors and ambushing them, as opposed to kicking gens and paying much attention to them. Anytime a survivor is healthy and they're working on a gen, they will be very pressured not to leave it, because they won't want this precious time spent on it to go to waste, and that can set you up for very powerful ambushes. And obviously, once they're injured, they will be easy targets on generators if you ambush them. And if they try to heal, that's where our next perk comes in. Nurse's Calling, especially with your high mobility and lack of terror radius, is an absolute godsend for the Wraith. This perk allows you to catch self-carrying survivors that are healing each other, and ambush them in the most effective and brutal way you can, so that they truly are in a lose-lose situation. This and the other information perk, Barbecue and Chili, are particularly useful if you pair them with add-ons such as Blind Warrior, the green one, that will make survivors take longer to heal. If you want to, you could also replace one of these perks for Sloppy Butcher and instead bring add-ons that help you find them. So your add-ons, whatever they might be, should complement your build on a killer like Wraith in particular, because they really act like perks in many occasions. On top of that, you'll have Barbecue and Chili, so that every time you hook a survivor, you have a radiography, a picture of what everybody else is doing. And one thing that you really must keep in mind with Wraith is that you need to invest your time very carefully. Sometimes if you bump into a survivor and chase them normally, you might spend 20 to 30 seconds to get a pallet out of the way, and maybe another 20 seconds before you get a hit. This is terrible. You don't want to do this with Wraith. You should be actively looking to spend an extra 5 or 10 seconds going out of your way to approach from an angle that they wouldn't expect. Survivors cannot see you from more than about 20 meters, I think it is now, when you're invisible. So you have freedom to take those 5 or extra 10 seconds to go around the edges of the map, maybe go behind the building and catch survivors off guard. You should also learn how to look at generators in a way that will not trigger Spine Chill. It's a really powerful ability to master with Wraith, and I'll cover that in another video. But take the extra time, ambush survivors, injure them, keep rotating, and keep making it hurt. Insta-down perks on Wraith are also really interesting, because it makes each hit all the more powerful, but they are by their very nature a little bit unpredictable, or a little bit hard to capitalize on, because survivors are hard to find or hard to catch afterwards. So by all means, builds that include heavy dosages of insta-down perks can absolutely work, but they are a little bit risky and perhaps a little bit less consistent. That being said, if you're starting with absolutely nothing, what should you go for? Go with the best add-ons your blood points can get, and put on Sloppy Butcher, which will make healing slower. It is the best starting perk on Wraith. You could pair that with Bloodhound, his own perk, to make the blood stay on the blood wheel, which now will fall more frequently on the ground. It will stay there for longer, and it will be brighter, easier to track, especially useful for new players. And on top of that, you could run something like Whispers and Know It. 2 perks that will help you know where to go at the start, and will give you a bit of an oomph near the end, which you might need if the game gets to that. If you are looking to immediately increase your effectiveness with just a DLC or 2, I will recommend you invest in the Hag. With the Hag, you could have a very mean Hex build going immediately. Keep the Sloppy Butcher, and then add Hex Ruin, Hex Devour Hope, and Thrilling Tremors. Thrill of the Hunt, a common perk that every killer starts with. This perk will slow down the progress of totems, and every time someone wants to deal with your Ruin, or eventually your Devour Hope, and they'll have to at one point, this perk will slow down their progress on the totems and alert you. And this can happen at the start or throughout the match, and you can use your cloaking and your invisibility to very quickly interrupt the survivor on a totem, keep them guessing, and make it really difficult to get rid of these totems, especially if they wait until the last minute when you're out of the insta-downing with Devour Hope. Very powerful stuff for just one DLC that you could totally go for if you're one of the people that chooses to play Wraith at the very start. Good luck with it. Wraith has a lot more depth than some people give him credit for. Next up is Hillbilly, a killer capable of using his chainsaw to quickly insta-down people if given the opportunity, as well as shred through pallets, and using his mobility for various purposes, usually getting around the map and acting on your perks. Unlike Wraith, he actually does come with some very decent perks, so even if you're starting out with nothing, you'll have a pretty decent build. What you could run something such as Tinkerer, his own perk, Enduring, his own perk, as well as something like Deerstalker and Bitter Murmur or Whispers or something to help you track survivors. This would typically do pretty well. And you could immediately do a lot if you were to buy the Clown DLC. With Clown, you could add Pop Goes the Weasel, an excellent perk, and you would know where to deliver it to. With Tinkerer, these two perks would feed on each other. Every time a survivor is about to finish a gen and you have a pop near available, you would go there and kick the gen and steal a lot of progress. And with Bamboozle, you'll be helping your chances to land a chainsaw in the instance of a survivor finding a very strong window. Very strong windows hurt the Hillbilly a lot. Unlike pallets, you cannot get rid of them, and a survivor can use them very effectively, and unless you're really something else, with Billy, you will typically struggle to land the chainsaw and will be forced to use your hammer instead, which obviously is not what you should go for. So with Bamboozle, you can block windows that you go through and steal them away from the survivors, forcing them to drop pallets sooner or even just drop dead in the first place. Eventually, if you want to go for the strongest build, I recommend that you add Ruin and Barbecue into this. You could keep Tinkerer if it's your cup of tea, but Barbecue will allow you to find survivors in the open and punish them immediately, and I prefer it, although Tinkerer is a fine choice. And the option to bring Ruin and Pop is a bit counterintuitive at first glance. Ruin, yes, regresses generators, and while they are regressing, you cannot kick them. So why would you run Ruin and Pop if you cannot use Pop as long as Ruin is up? That's the idea, really. You have a plan A and a plan B, and survivors are in a bit of a lose-lose situation almost no matter what. It actually works out fairly well and is stupidly effective. While your Ruin is up, you will be more ambitious. You will know that if you down survivors and keep downing them, survivors will have to come and rescue them, and gens will start to drain and things will go your way. Once you lose Ruin, that's okay. You'll just play a bit more conservatively. You will start to get people killed, start to pile up hooks, and go to those gens with Tinkerer or Barbecue and keep regressing them by just kicking them. So you have a bit of a contingency in the form of Pop, but if you play well enough and they're not lucky finding your Ruin early, you will be able to take advantage of it still. With this build, you have very few weaknesses. Play smarter on pallets, bamboozle the windows that give you trouble, and know when not to use your power in a chase, and when to just go for the M1 if you really need to, and you have a very solid build. Alternatives, you could run Enduring and Spirit Fury, a very popular idea to get rid of pallets even more quickly. I don't dislike it, but I don't think your pallets are going to be the biggest struggle. It's typically stronger windows against good survivors that will be that struggle. There's also a new crowd control perk from the Trickster, which can replace Bamboozle with a similar effect, although here you would need to wait for a survivor to vault the window first, whereas Bamboozle is a bit more proactive. But it's really all up to you. Billy doesn't need many crazy perks to work, and if you're good enough with him, you might even consider running fewer perks and just relying on your power and your own ability to down survivors. Good luck, though, because your add-ons for the most part won't be there to help you very much after his nerf. Nurse is a killer that, despite a considerable nerf, is still considered one of the best, if not the best in the game. And for that reason, if you're very consistent, very strong power is used right, you also don't need a lot of perks to help you. If you're a good enough nurse, you can probably do wonders with almost nothing. But assuming that you need all the help you can get, this build is pretty damn mean. You're gonna run Corrupt Intervention, force survivors towards you, have an easier time finding them, ideally. And Thrill and Tremors and Pop. Thrill and Tremors and Pop are very, they have a very basic idea going on with them. Every time you pick up a survivor, you see the generators that are being worked on with Thrill and Tremors, and you walk towards them. And you hook the survivor near them, and you try to go for the Pop. And while you do so, you activate your final perk, Starstruck. Any survivor around you is now insta-downable. And unlike other killers, you can literally teleport right next to them and hit them. And if your teleports are on point, that's it. Game over. You don't want to go a little bit too crazy with this. You don't want to try to get everyone Starstruck. Play normally, And I'm guaranteeing you, Starstruck will come into play without you trying to force it too much. With this combination of perks, you have a very, very oppressive build, but one that you can totally modify to your own liking. You could totally drop Thrill and Tremors and switch instead to something like Barbecue for a similar effect. Starstruck is a nice insta-down novelty, but you could also go for something like Sloppy Butcher, which would also slow down the game just fine and keep people injured for longer, allowing you to having an easier time downing them eventually. And this would still be a very, very strong build. And any information perks on Nurse and any perks that help you track survivors, Amaliers, Discordance, Bitter Murmur, all of them are good enough since you don't really need a lot of lethality. Your add-ons honestly almost don't matter in this. If you have good add-ons to recover quicker and catch up to survivors, or range add-ons to close the gap faster, you'll find that it's even harder for them to escape your Starstruck. But either way, even without them, you should do really, really well with Nurse. Now that being said, what if you're just starting out and you have absolutely nothing? If you're just starting out, do look through her add-ons. She has many add-ons that are really useful for beginners. There is the Plate Flannel that will let you know where you're blinking. That might be useful. And also the Tooth and the Spoon, which will act as perks. These add-ons show you the art of healing survivors and make them a little bit louder. And these are things that are almost like perks. So consider putting that into your basic build, which could consist of Sloppy, Nurses, Whispers, and Bitter Murmur. These are all mostly tracking perks, with Sloppy there to slow down healings a little bit. Nothing too crazy, but on a killer this powerful, it might just be enough from there. If you were to only go for a single DLC, I think the Hag one would give you a lot of value. Ruin and Devour are both absolutely insane perks on this killer, and you could start running them on a build very, very quickly after that. And with that, you should have a pretty good idea of what to run on Nurse. Insta-down perks are crazy good on her, tracking perks are crazy good on her, slowdown perks, as usual, are good on her. You can almost not go wrong. Obviously, don't run any of the perks that help you in chase, because she doesn't really need that, and you'll be doing fine. Next up is Huntress. And with Huntress, you have a difficult choice. Many of the perks that used to be really, really good on her have been slightly outdated or don't work as good anymore. For the sake of consistency, I do recommend you run Corrupt and Pop. With Corrupt, you will artificially make even a small map smaller and a bigger map a little bit not so big, so that you can deal with the resulting 4 generators. And in those 4 generators, ideally, if your chases go well, you should be able to use Pop Goes the Weasel early on, and perhaps later throughout the match, you'll get to use it a little bit more. Unfortunately, the Huntress cannot defend totems really well, and even though she is a monstrous killer in terms of snowballing, it is very, very hard to keep Ruin alive. You can run Ruin on her, absolutely. You could even run it alongside Pop, with a similar idea as we did with Billy earlier. But if you're just in the business of keeping things consistent, run Pop and Corrupt, and these 2 perks will make each other work a little bit more, even if you don't manage to land Pops as frequent as some of the other higher mobility killers. On top of that, Barbecue is still really good on her. The fact that she does not have great mobility and that she advertises her own coming to survivors with her humming radios means that any information perk that points you towards multiple survivors is a great idea. And Barbecue will show you people in the open. It will help you practice your long map shots if you're into that. And Bitter Murmur also plays a similar role in that. When a Bitter Murmur triggers, you'll see often 1 or 2 survivors try to hide, and if you're approaching, which can lead you to situations where you quickly get a hit on them. If they're running in the open, you can also line up hatchets, which they very rarely expect. Thank you. It's also a great tool to help you practice snipe. These perks, however, can be replaced by other perks that help you track or in chase. You could run Thrill and Tremors instead of Barbecue. You could run Discordance instead of Corrupt Intervention for a similar effect. You wouldn't be blocking generators, but you would be harassing as many survivors as possible at any given time. And instead of Bitter Murmur, you could run perks like I'm All Ears, which would help you track survivors in jungle gyms where you typically struggle, and maybe prepare some hatchet around the corner and get some nasty hit that survivors are not expecting. This would, of course, these add-ons would also pair well with these perks would also pair well with add-ons that can help you cover some of your weaknesses. To help slow down healing, you could use the Begrime Head. To help track survivors better, you could use the Glowing Concoction, and so on and so forth. But I'm sure you're well aware of that. Now, if you're starting out with Huntress, unfortunately, she really doesn't come with a huge arsenal of useful perks. I do recommend that you bank on Huntress Lullaby, which is her Hex perk. If you get a bit lucky and you're capable of getting a few downs, this perk can begin to be annoying and sometimes tilt things in your favor by making skill checks a little bit difficult to hit. And if they do miss them, they will experience extra aggression. You can use Huntress Lullaby as well as Thrill the Hunt to slow down those totems and trick them to getting the wrong one, perhaps, and keep Huntress Lullaby alive for a bit longer. And on top of that, you could use the combo of Whispers and Bitter Murmur to constantly know where to go from the very beginning, and constantly make sure that you're not wasting time in an area that's not occupied by survivors. And we've already explained what Bitter Murmur does. It will give you a bit of a heads up where survivors are headed after every gen. And at the end of the game, if it comes to that, you can also see every single survivor and hopefully deal with them and wrap up a difficult endgame with that information and some well-placed hatchets. That's about it for Huntress. There are certainly other perks worth mentioning. You could go for Legion and grab Discordance and Iron Maiden, two decent and useful perks for her. But if I had to pick DLCs, perhaps I would instead choose Ghostface, which comes with Thrilling Tremors and Amal Ears, or Hag, which comes with the all-powerful Ruin and Devour, which honestly you can never go wrong with on basically any killer. So those are the builds I would recommend for her in the current year. Now, Michael faces some unique problems. He's one of the more outdated killers, and in a game that goes faster and faster by the day, he seems to be a bit slow. You start as a tier 1 Michael, and you need desperately to get out of tier 1. Your stealth in tier 1 means very, very little. It is more of a hindrance. You need to get out of tier 1, and your build needs to help you to do that. And once you're in tier 2, you need something to let you know when to go into tier 3, and hopefully something to keep the gens at bay. There are a few ways to achieve this. This build is the most effective one that I have found. It consists of Corrupt Intervention. Make survivors immediately run in the open. With a 0 turret radius, you're very likely to bump into at least 1 or 2 of them. And at this point, you need to look for the most effective way of getting out of tier 1. Whether it is to chase a survivor for a little bit and get out, or catch a survivor going to a gen and stalk them for a little bit until they realize. Anything it takes, use Corrupt Intervention to get out of tier 1. And then immediately try to go for a tier 3 early on. When you go for a tier 3 early on, many good things happen. Survivors immediately try to hide, and you get to use the rest of perks in this arsenal. You're going to try to down a survivor, hook them, and keep the pressure on the rest. There's only 4 generators to worry about with Corrupt, and Ruin will make those gens that you're chasing them away from begin to regress. At this point, or a little bit earlier or a bit later, they will find one of your 3 totems: Ruin, Undying, and Retribution. And they're gonna do them. No matter which totem they find, the first one to disappear will be Retribution. And then the next one will be Undying. And then the next one will be either Retribution or Ruin. So they'll need to get either 2 or 3 totems to get to your Ruin. And every time they do one of these totems, every time, you will get to see everyone's aura in the map at once, because Retribution will trigger. This is awesome. Now, knowing where every single person is can let you do some devastating tier 3 plays. You have a survivor that you've just downed, you have tier 3 ready, you put them on the hook, someone does a totem, and you find someone that was hiding behind a tree. You immediately down them, and now you look around the map and you see that the other two are really far away. Perfect. Take your time, pick up that survivor, put them close to the other one, and now you know where the other two people are coming from. You can chase one of them, and now the other person has to come for the rescue to keep the team alive. In this time, if they had any gens going on, and Ruin is still alive, which probably it is, thanks to Undying, now those gens are going back to nothing. And in those 60 seconds of tier 3, you have done irreparable damage to their hook stages, to the pallets they've had to throw, to the gens they've started doing, but are now going back to nothing. This is good even with no add-ons, but add-ons will make it even more powerful. Alternatives, are there any? Absolutely. The information from Retribution could easily be replaced by other perks. Infectious Fright is a popular perk on Myers. By all means, give it a shot. But I personally prefer information from another perk that goes very well into another build, which is very similar to this one. It consists of Corrupt Intervention, Pop, Search, and Surveillance. The idea with this build is that you're constantly insta-downing survivors as much as you can, immediately making gens around you explode with Search, hooking those survivors, and then going towards other generators with your pop that is now available. Between your kicks and the surges, Surveillance will show you the white auras of any regressing generators. And when survivors eventually get back on them, you will see these auras turn yellow. And because you have a very small terror radius, you can actually get very, very close to these survivors that are now on generators before they know you're coming. And this can be further enhanced with add-ons like That Rabbit or perks like Monitor and Abuse if you want to. And Surveillance will make your turret radius be really noticeable because you'll be going straight to where you need to go and make those 16 meters in tier 2 really, really good. If someone tries to cheekily touch a generator when they shouldn't because they want to prevent ruin, you will also immediately know, and you'll know where to go to find people. So this build, also rather consistent and very, very good, as long as you try to put the pressure on the survivors super early. Now, what happens when you have absolutely no teachable perks on Myers? He is a bit difficult. You're still very slow at the start. Use the best add-ons you can to stock faster and get out of tier 1 as quickly as possible. But you don't really have a lot of perks to slow the game in your favor. What I would recommend is Whispers, to immediately give you an idea of where you should go at the start and find your survivors as quickly as possible. The combination of Save the Best for Last and Play with Your Food. And then something such as Deerstalker or Sloppy Butcher, any other perk from the base list that will help you a little bit. Deerstalker is more geared towards people that want to slug and eventually find the people that they left on the ground. And Sloppy Butcher is not the absolute best, but it will slow down healing a little bit, which is never too bad. With Save the Best for Last and Play with Your Food, you ideally want to have a back and forth with the Obsession. If you find the Obsession, stalk them. You will lose the chase while you stalk and get a Play with Your Food stack, and then harass the non-Obsession survivors, and you will constantly be faster and faster and faster and recover quicker and quicker and quicker. And if you're very, very aggressive, this build alone can help you out. Although I do recommend that you do look into upgrading into better perks. As we mentioned earlier, Infectious is a very attractive one, and you will need Corrupt eventually. So if you could have one DLC to choose, I would definitely recommend that you go for the Plague DLC, as she will give you these 2 perks. And with these 2 perks, you could have already a build such as, Sloppy Butcher, Corrupt Intervention, Infectious Fright, and the perks, the Plague's own Dark Devotion. Dark Devotion of Myers is actually really legit. You can hit the Obsession, maybe even instant-out them, and then put them on the hook or leave them on the ground, and completely catch someone else off guard because you are now undetectable. And the terror radius is back at the Obsession. Quite a decent and unexpected perk on Myers that you could have access to immediately if you unlock it from the Plague. And that's about it for Myers. Don't forget that you need to get out of tier 1 as soon as possible, and that it's a little bit some of the perks that you would typically run on him to help you in chase once you're in tier 3 are sometimes a little bit counterproductive. Even the best brutal strength is not going to help you against a map with a ton of pallets. You will not get value out of your tier 3s by having a perk that makes you do certain things quicker. You just need to get better at timing when. Don't rely on these perks too much is my piece of advice. But by all means, have a ton of fun with Myers. Many builds can work on him. And then we've got Hag. Hag is an absolute monster. She is also fairly unique, and she might be the only killer in the game that actually wants to be left alone. Every other killer, to a bigger or smaller degree, needs to go out of their way to chase survivors from the very beginning. And not chasing survivors immediately hurts you. With a Hag, you actually have a different mindset. You will set up a web of traps, a perimeter of traps, and eventually this perimeter will be so dangerous that anyone that you push towards it will go down very quickly. And rescuing that person will be downright impossible. And leaving that perimeter will be basically impossible for the survivors to do once you're properly set up and you keep expanding it and moving as you see fit. For that reason, you're not going to be actively chasing survivors around the map with barbecue and chili. You're not going to go into long one-on-one chases. You're going to have the perks that will help you set up. Now, you could totally drop Corrupt Intervention, our first perk in this build, and instead run something such as Whispers or literally anything else and give up a few gens and set up a powerful web. That's an idea, but similar to Trapper, you benefit from Corrupt Intervention. With Corrupt Intervention, if you're fast enough, and I have a video explaining how you can manage this, you can set up a decent perimeter and build into it while still making the survivors not able to work on those starting gens right away. And then you will have to give nothing up. Survivors will begin to go down and they won't have any gens finished by the time you're really, really ready. Corrupt Intervention, I think, is absolutely worth it. Grab it from the plague and slap it onto this build. You'll thank me later. Then we have the perks Agitation and Starstruck. These two perks by themselves might not be good enough for a Hag or worth bringing into a build together. However, they are absolutely disgusting. With Agitation, you will spend less time traveling to hooks, which means less time for the survivors to mess with your traps while you cannot teleport to them. You will be more capable of bringing them towards the area that you've already trapped, or the basement, or whichever devious plan you have going. And it also has the side effect of increasing your terror radius by 12 meters, bringing it to a total of, I believe, 36 meters. 36 meters is a lot. And anyone that touches this terror radius by even a little bit would be affected by the next perk, Starstruck, which will make them insta-downable. This means that survivors who typically have to harass you to win against your Hag can now not harass you without the risk of immediately going down and joining their friends in the basement or corner of the map or whatever it is you're bringing them towards. This is absolutely evil and wicked and disgusting and really, really good. So these two perks are disgustingly powerful. Other perks that can help you insta-down, make your choice, or slow down the game, or give you a bit of a down at the start, Haunt the Grounds. They're all fine, but Starstruck is particularly consistent, very easy to use, and very annoying for survivors to deal with. Very, very powerful, becomes particularly good with Agitation. And then your final perk is there just to slow down the game a bit. You could honestly slap Sloppy Butcher as your fourth perk, and that would be awesome. You could run Save the Best for Last, which will make you teleport between your traps quicker, although you might not need it if you're insta-downing them. Would also be a decent choice. Monitor and Abuse is a great perk for Hag that allows her to stay undetected a bit more and be more unpredictable. But since we're going for the whole terror radius, we're not really going to consider it for this build. But Ruin is just annoying. If they get rid of Ruin, great. They wasted time and they allow you to set up your traps. They're going to die anyway. And if they don't find Ruin and you start insta-downing them and you start bringing them into your perimeter, this perk will just cement their loss immediately. So by all means, experiment, but Ruin is a safe choice that even in the worst scenario will help you quite a bit. Now, if this is very fancy for you, you can go for a more classic, slightly slightly antiquated, but still very, very good. Corrupt, Monitor and Abuse, Nurse's Calling, and Sloppy Butcher. This build does everything. Makes your turrets smaller so that you can remain undetected at the start. Blocks the gens the same way. Survivors will heal slower, which is always a good thing with Hag. And if they do heal, you'll see them. So you can corral them and approach them from whichever way will end up in them going towards your traps. Great stuff. Hag is also one of the few really good users of Franklin's Demise. A perk that I wouldn't typically recommend on other killers. She uses it extremely well. You see a team with several medkits, maybe a flashlight or two, and you don't want to deal with that. Franklin's will put a right end to that very, very quickly. Survivors that would typically take a hit and heal will now take a hit and have nothing and will be helpless often when it comes to helping their teams with their flashlights or their items once they're healed up with medkits and so on. Lots and lots and lots of perks that help Hag. But the fun part is, if you're a good enough Hag, you don't even need them too much because your power in itself is already so oppressive. So you're only making an already powerful ability even more deadly. And we haven't even talked about add-ons. If you have distance add-ons, Starstruck can catch survivors running away from even further. You can set up traps from even close. You can set up a perimeter even faster with Corrupt Intervention, with setting speed add-ons, and so on and so on and so forth. You really can go nuts. That being said, what if you're just starting out and you have no other teachables? Literally nothing happens because the Hag already has some insanely powerful perks. You could run Ruin and Devour, which would be annoying, and eventually survivors will have to deal with it. The aforementioned Sloppy Butcher for overall slowdown of the game, and then a final Noid Slap, which would make endgame, if they get to that, really, really difficult if they're already running out of pallets and you still have some traps left around the map. And you can typically prepare for this and make sure someone dies and then deal with the final survivors with Noid by trapping executes and whatnot. So particularly strong on her as well. So even with no other builds, with no other teachables from other killers, the Hag is still a force to be reckoned with. So start practice on her and best of luck. Next up is Doctor. And he also has a range of perks to go with, but we're also going to take advantage of the new and powerful Starstruck. Doctor with add-ons can have abnormally larger terror radiuses, which is awesome. And you can use this not just to inflict the Starstruck effect and make them insta-downable, but also to find them later with your blast. So Starstruck is immediately a really, really strong and consistent option. If you're in a small map, you will make this a bit of a nightmare to deal with. If you're on a larger map, you will not get as much use out of it, but it will still be a much more consistent perk than other insta-down perks. So great choice on him. The add-ons can really help. Once you pick up a survivor, you can also use the next perks, Thrill and Tremors, to immediately go towards the gens that you know are being worked on, because you can see it physically, because they don't turn white, and make sure that there's survivors there that they're effective with, and that then you can blast, find, and eventually insta-down. You can also put survivors in Madness Tier 3 if you know they're nearby and next to a gen, and then pick up a survivor, and Thrill and Tremors will block that generator. Survivors that are snapping out of Madness Tier 3 won't be able to work on it, even after it's blocked. And Surge, which is your next perk, can hit generators that are even blocked with Thrill and Tremors. If you find one of them quick enough, it will still work with Thrill and Tremors. With Surge and Pop, you basically have the ability to insta-down and immediately regress gens with Surge. And then on top of that, if there's still gens that need a little bit of help, you could go there and pop them. Alternatively, you could run Ruin, and that would be pretty evil and just as effective. But if you want a more consistent perk, I think Pop is the way to go. With this build, you will constantly have information of where to go for gens. The gens, as long as you're getting downs relatively consistently, will keep regressing, and the survivors around you will be in a constant state of fear, as they should, because you're a doctor. That being said, if you do not favor the whole Starstruck idea, another very consistent build that helps your lethality is to keep Surge and Pop, but switch to Discordance and Say the Best for Last. These two perks serve a similar purpose. With Discordance, you'll constantly know where multiple survivors are. You can go there and blast them, keeping their madness up and up. And since you're finding multiple survivors, you'll constantly find a non-obsession. There can only be one obsession, so if you find 2 or more survivors, one of them is not going to be the obsession. Stay on the non-obsession survivors, whoever they are, and keep hitting them. Keep hitting them. They'll have less and less time to go to different parts of the map because your Say the Best for Last will keep growing in power and you'll catch up to them even quicker. Eventually, with Say the Best for Last, you can do really dirty plays on Doctor, where you shock a survivor, hit them, and then if they don't play it right, you can sometimes even grab them on a pallet that they're next to because they still are recovering from your shock and you have already recovered from the cooldown of your first hit. So very, very powerful stuff. Eventually, you will deal with the obsession later, but you will have done considerable damage to the other survivors. Every time you down one of these survivors, and you'll be doing it more and more, Search will constantly keep the generators around you regressing, and you'll have a complementary pop to go along with it to help whichever gens still need a little bit of monitoring. That being said, what if you don't have any perks on Doctor and you're starting out? Unfortunately, you're limited. You could run something such as Whispers. It could be as a bit of a replacement to Discordance and Tremors. Whispers will turn on anytime survivors are around you, and it's a good indication of when to use your blast to find out exactly where those survivors are. If survivors don't scream, maybe consider start checking lockers because they might be in them. On top of this, you could have Noid to help you at the end. If survivors are instantable and you move faster, well, clearly use your blast and you can very, very quickly bring them out of hiding and eventually down them. And the other 2 perks that you can use to try to slow down the game a little bit that you come with are Sloppy Butcher, will slow down healing a little bit, and Overcharge. Every time you hit a generator, they'll get a skill check. And because you're Doctor, and you might have certain add-ons, and they might be at a certain madness threshold, this skill check might actually be a little bit more challenging. With other killers, Overcharge is really not worth it, but with Doctor, especially if you're starting out, and you're playing against survivors that are not so crazy good, it can actually work out fairly well. As usual, the Hag is a powerful DLC to consider. Ruin and Devour really go well with Doctor, as you can imagine. And Trickster also has very, very decent perks for him. I think most of the Trickster perks, Starstruck, No Way Out, Crowd Control, go very well with the Doctor, actually. So those are 2 DLCs to consider if you want to add to his base kit arsenal and get better at him. Next up is Cannibal. He's a little bit more straightforward than the Hillbilly. He does not have his mobility, which would typically make you think that he's just an immediately inferior Billy, but his add-ons are way, way stronger, and his Shenso is way easier to use, and dare I say, more deadly. The Cannibal catches you in the open, and you're down. If you have borrowed time, he can get you twice, and down you. If you have sprint burst and he's close enough, he can use his Shenso to catch you at the end of your sprint burst. It's all about making this Shenso work and knowing where to go and trying to waste as little time and go through the pallets as much as you can. I generally do think that you shouldn't bother yourself with complicated perks and just use a build that tells you where to go and what to do at any given time. My suggestion would be Ruin and Dying. Don't bother with Pop, although you could run Ruin and Pop as well if you really want to and you don't like Undying. And Discordance and Tinkerer. These 2 perks basically tell you everything you need to know. If a generator has 2 people at the start, or 3, or all 4, you will know to go there and waste everybody's time. Catch whichever survivor is in the worst spot, try to down them. If not, try to get pallets out of the way and eventually down them. If Tinkerer triggers, there can be 2 situations. Either it triggers without Discordance, and you know that you have roughly 24 seconds to get there, which is a lot of time. And if you catch a survivor off guard with the Tinkerer stealth, that is huge, because it can result in an easy down. Or it also triggers with Discordance. If it triggers with Discordance, then you know that you have more like 12 seconds, because there's 2 or more survivors on that gen, depending on what you've already seen. So when you have Trigger, Tinkerer, and Discordance on the same gen, then you know to get there within 12 seconds or to just give it out completely and focus on what you're doing right now. These two perks immediately tell you where to go in terms of gens. And your other two previous perks, either Ruin and Pop or Ruin and Undying, or even Corrupt and Pop, this would also be fairly consistent and fairly good. These perks will basically keep the gens at bay and allow you to contest generators by hooking people near them and keeping everyone on their toes, and without wasting time on gens, having them go down very, very slowly. These would be two very, very decent, or 2 or 3 variations, and very, very decent ones. Perhaps you do not favor Tinkerer. Barbecue is a completely fine idea, which she already comes up with. You can also run that perk. That being said, if you start out with absolutely nothing, what do you have going for you? The perks that I've written down that I think you should use are his own Barbecue, which will give you information to go around. Whispers, very useful at the start. Make sure you get your first chases going and start burning through pallets that they'll later come to miss. And then the combination of Sloppy Butcher and Franklin's. Obviously, use Franklin's if you see items. If you don't see items, you don't need it. You don't need to bring it. With Franklin's and Sloppy, you will have a decent alternative to your Chenso. If you're forced to hit survivors and windows, they'll be slowed down in their healing, and they'll also lose any potentially useful items that they could have been bringing. A bit of an annoying combination for them, and not the absolute best. However, you're not very far from the absolute best. If you want to become an immediate powerhouse with Cannibal, I recommend that you go for the Clown DLC. The Clown has the perk Pop Goes the Weasel, which is an instant hit, and a very powerful one on Cannibal, since it can get down rather easily at times. And the perk Bamboozle. And very much like Billy, Bamboozle is a godsend on this killer. This killer shreds through pallets very fast and very consistently. You don't need to mind game, you don't need to time a very good curve. You use your Chenso at the right times, and the pallet usually goes down unless the survivor decides to just die, typically. So for that reason, windows become a much more powerful resource against you. Windows cannot be destroyed, and survivors that use them very well typically will force you to M1 them. Not with Bamboozle. With Bamboozle, if you identify a window that's going to give you trouble, you go right through it at the start of the chase and immediately knock it out of the way, force the survivor to go elsewhere or go down. So these two perks with, say, Whispers and Barbecue could already give you a very, very strong, very, very powerful build. With Whispers, you know where to go at the start. You hook a survivor, you see someone with Barbecue, you go there, you pop it, you go into a chase, use Bamboozle here and there. Perfectly acceptable, perfectly decent build on Cannibal, just with one DLC. That's what I would recommend. Next up is Freddy, the Nightmare. And he's going to get a sizable nerf in this upcoming update, in the mid-chapter patch. And I'm going to assume, I'm going to work under the idea that this nerf has already happened. This nerf is going to greatly reduce the power of some of his add-ons, and also make you have to think about your snares or your pallets a bit more carefully than before. That's all fine. The same fundamentals of Freddy are still there. He is a killer that passively puts people to sleep, has a bit of stealth associated to it. He no longer has any slowdown through his add-ons, but he still benefits very much from slowdown from his perks. If survivors fall asleep, you eventually can use your power against them. And the more you defend gens, the more you can teleport to them, which is his real threatening ability to keep them under control. Corrupt Intervention goes well with him. It's a very boring perk that I really hate running in a killer like this, but it really, really works. With this perk, you will make survivors have to waste time at the start before they get on a gen, reduce the amount of gens that you have to go around, and this will result in them falling asleep more often. By the time you are engaged with several of them, they will all be asleep, or will be forced to waste time waking up, which is good for you. Alternatively, you could replace this one with Discordance, and that would also give you an idea of where everybody is, so that you can bother many of them at a time. We're going to be running the extremely boring yet effective Ruin and Pop combination. As long as Ruin is up, we'll be a bit more aggressive and we'll try to go for slugs if we need to, make sure that we involve the whole team, make sure the gens get regressing. The moment Ruin is gone, we'll have to be a bit more active. And we won't be able to get away with just creating pressure and the gens regress. We need to go to the gens and kick them. But we'll have Tinkerer to let us know. Tinkerer does not hide the lullaby, so asleep survivors will still hear you, but awake survivors will not. Which is nice, because, you know, those are the survivors you need to worry the most about. So with Tinkerer, you have a great warning when a gen is close to being done, and when you need to go there and bother it while Run is up, or when you need to go there and deliver a pop after a hook. You do not bring any perks to help you in chase. Instead, you rely on your power and your ability to juggle survivors back and forth and catch them off guard and do some cheeky teleports, and maybe fake a teleport here and there to eventually catch them, grind through their pallets, and use your very, very obnoxious slowdown to eventually win the game. That being said, you can no longer cheese survivors off the hook because BT doesn't work. Now BT will work. You can no longer spam snares everywhere. They slow you down now, so you need to place them a bit better. And if you're running pallets, you cannot place them absolutely everywhere because they're more limited. So you need to be a bit more choosy with how you use it. Still, the very basic build that I suggested should carry you well enough. That being said, instant down perks are decent on him if you can deal with their unpredictability. If you're starting out, however, and you have absolutely nothing, his perks are rather easy to play around. Some of them are quite expected. I would recommend that you opt for Sloppy Butcher, which is always good on him. Remember Me, which is a bit of a form to slow in the game. And then Bitter Murmur and Noid. Bitter Murmur will obviously give you information throughout the match, but also at the end, how many survivors are left, you will see all of them for 10 seconds and have an insta-down to go with it, as well as Remember Me, which should slow down survivors at the exit gates a little bit, which might make Bitter Murmur and Noid a plan. You could also incorporate Blood Warden somewhere into this build if you want to commit to an endgame, but that is a bit expected on Freddy, so don't be surprised if survivors play around it. If I had to go for a single DLC, I think Ruin and Devour are really, really powerful on him, and you cannot go wrong with Hag. So start getting Hag, keep using Sloppy Butcher, and you should have a pretty good build just with one DLC. Next up is the Pig. And the Pig comes with the ability to slow down survivors naturally with her power, a very limited capability of stealthing, as well as a very limited ability to get hits here and there using her ambush in chase. With certain add-ons, her power becomes quite capable of consistently killing survivors, but I'm going to assume that you're not going that route and you're just focusing on normal gameplay and not really relying on luck to get survivors killed. In my opinion, the absolute best build is to absolutely shock and overwhelm survivors with an unfathomable amount of side objectives. And that's what this extremely cursed, extremely evil build accomplishes. We have Ruin, Devour, Undying, and Thrill of the Hunt. Obviously, when you get your first down, survivors will be short one person. That person will typically have to remove their reverse bird trap. And out of the 3 survivors remaining, you will be able to bother maybe 1 or 2 of them, and the gens will begin to regress. You will also eventually rack up stacks of Devour Hope, and those will add up eventually until you can insta-down survivors. If they try to do totems at this point, they'll find that they have to go through several totems before they get to Ruin or they get to Devour, and the first one will always be Undying, our final perk. And the thing is, with our final perk, Thrill of the Hunt, each totem search will take 20 seconds, which is an absolute eternity, a very, very long time. With this long time, you can actually use your stealth to interrupt survivors in totems. If a survivor gets to a totem at the start of the match or throughout the match, you can very quickly, if you're within range, obviously if you're too far, hurry up and try to stop them, but if you're within a certain range, you can crouch, and approach and eventually insta-down them, try to grab them, or get a cheeky hit and interrupt them. If they spend 19 seconds on that first totem and you interrupt them, that progress is immediately lost. And even though it's hard to protect the totems forever, you can do so pretty reasonably until you're at a certain stage into the game. At that point, when they've dealt with many of your totems, you'll have dealt basically unrecoverable damage to them. You'll have hooked them too many times, they'll have too many searches to go through, the Devourer will be at 4 stacks and you'll be threatening to moy them on the next one. Ruin will have done a lot of damage if they had to spend a lot of time on totems. The idea of this build is just to harass them and overwhelm them with objectives. They have to worry about the gens, they have to worry about their boxes, they have to worry about not doing gens too quickly and getting their teammates killed, they have to worry about Devoured insta-downing them, but they also need to worry about doing totems, but the totems are really slow, and you can interrupt them with your stealth at any given time. That's a lot, and the average team will crumble after being in such a position. With that being said, if you want to play a bit more of a typical build, I've got you covered. Corrupt Intervention, Barbecue in Chile, Say the Best for Last, and Pub Goose Weasel. With Pub Goose Weasel on Corrupt, you have a typical slowdown, make them come towards you, don't use your stealth early on too much, and eventually bump into them sort of deal. And with Pop, you will be able to deliver it. Survivors will not be 99ing gens probably, you will be able to pop gens, and with your own slowdown, this can be quite significant. A barbecue is surprisingly useful on Pig. You will find people doing gens, but also people going around from box to box, people healing, and this will give you ample chances to know what they're doing and what you should be doing next, whether you want to harass them or go for someone else. That information for barbecue is really, really useful. And Say the Best for Last is a hidden gem on the Pig. Because you have the ability to dash and hit your obsession, you can avoid losing stacks. So if you do that for the obsession and use normal attacks on everyone else, eventually you will have built up many, many stacks to Say the Best for Last, and survivors will have to worry about Pop on the gens, their hitboxes, and a Pig that hits them, recovers really quickly, and is immediately back on their butts. So with all of that, this is a very, very decent, more average build on Pig. But you might not have all of these perks, you might be starting with absolutely nothing. What to do in that situation? Let me take my notes right here. Right, so with Pig, you actually have a decent amount of perks. You really want to use the best add-ons you can to slow on the game, since these perks by themselves are not crazy. And if you do well enough in your performance, these perks might just be able to help you enough, which is more than some other killers can say, to get consistent wins. You're going to be using Make Your Choice, the Pig's own perk, Surveillance, as well as Bitter Murmur and Sloppy Butcher. With Sloppy Butcher, you slow down the game a little bit, make it a little bit harder for them to heal every time they unhook each other, or give you more time to interrupt them if you're going that route. With Bitter Murmur, you'll have information about when survivors are going certain ways after doing a gen, and this information can sometimes set you up for really good ambushes. You know a gen has just popped and you see a survivor crouch out of it towards a certain direction, you can crouch and catch them off guard. It also helps you at the end of the game, of course, by showing you absolutely everyone. On top of that, Make Your Choice will constantly threaten to insta-down the person that gets unhooks. This and Sloppy Butcher will make it even less desirable to heal under the hook, and it will typically force survivors to not heal and be in danger, or to spread out and go elsewhere. Surveillance by itself is not a terrifically powerful perk, but every time you kick a generator, you'll be able to be to have the security that no one is on it by just checking. And if someone does get on it and you see the perk make the generator turn from white to yellow, then it is a really good time to use your stealth, because there's a very good chance you'll catch someone there. So this perk by itself will give you a little bit of information, and will also maybe tell you when to use your stealth, which is something you should be learning as a new pick. If you're in the business of getting a better build for her right away, I recommend that you go for the Hack DLC, because you can get Ruin, Devour, and already have Thrill of the Hunt going. And instead of Undying, you can just bring Sloppy Butcher or whatever other fourth perk you wish. And that should already be a pretty mean build on Pig that, as we said, should overwhelm survivors. And you really don't need a lot more. Happy hunting with a Pig. Next up, is Clown. The Clown has now a different ability that basically makes him good at what he was already good and at nothing else. He doesn't really have mobility. He doesn't really have a lot of pressure. He cannot bother multiple survivors effectively at all, unlike some other killers. He is just very, very, very good at forcing survivors down a certain route. And this route typically is using a window once and then immediately taking a hit, or straight up dropping the pallet and conceding. If the survivors are a little bit greedy, or if you play exceptionally well, you can sometimes turn situations where survivors would typically get away with it into guaranteed downs or guaranteed hits. The problem is that after one hit, well, that survivor is out of there, and it will take a while to catch up, and you really don't have that much going. For that reason, I really recommend that you try to up the Clown's lethality. He's a very good chaser, but his attack lacks a bit of a punch. Increase that punch a little bit, and the Clown becomes very oppressive in the 1v1 very, very quickly. And if you're oppressive enough in the 1v1, the rest of the game will go in your favor. To this end, I recommend this very hex-intensive build. Devour Hope, Ruin, Undying. These 3 perks basically guaranteed that survivors will have to cleanse 3 totems. If you are getting downs consistently, and hopefully you will, survivors will have to do 3 totems. No question about it. They will the first totem will always be your Undying, because it takes a bullet for the other 2 totems, and then you'll be left with Devour and Ruin. If they don't cleanse your Devour, you'll eventually get 3 totems and start insta-downing people. And there's nothing more terrifying than an insta-downing Clown that is catching you when you don't have pallets around. And if they get Devour but don't get Ruin, you might still be able, thanks to all the time they've spent doing these other 2 totems, to really slow down the game, and with our 4th perk, make the gens really, really slow in such a way that Ruin is really, really powerful. So you need to be very careful about which survivors you pick. Try to get them killed early, and these perks work really beautifully. On top of these 3 perks, you have Search. If everything else fails, Search is always there. A little bit harder to use on the larger maps, but still very serviceable, and particularly useful with Devour and with Ruin. Very simple. If you're insta-downing survivors, Search is getting value even more frequently. And if you have Ruin up, gens are regressing. And then every now and then, when you get a down, they're also having extra regression taken from them by Search. So a gen that's already regressing very, very fast will go down even faster and will reach 0 even quicker if you also apply a Search or 2 to it. This build is great, but it really depends on your ability to find the weakest link and get those down consistently. If you lose 2 totems early without doing anything, this build will begin to fall apart, and it is a tough one. I did use this build to get 50 wins in a row with Clown, and I really, really do believe in its strength, but it is a very nuclear build that you really need to play around. If you want to go for a different approach, and you're not so fond of hexes, I do recommend this other build that I also did use to a pretty good extent. And it is the very same idea that we used on Doctor earlier. It consists of Discordance, Save the Best for Last, Search, and Pop. Instead of insta-downing survivors with Devour or some other perk, we will now be increasing our lethality with Save the Best for Last. The idea is that when we have many stacks of Save the Best for Last, we'll hit a survivor and recover so fast that they'll have very little time to get away from us. And we'll be able to catch up very quickly and eventually rob them of any chance to escape. With Discordance, you will constantly find multiple survivors. This will help you at the start and throughout the match to make sure that you're bothering as many of them at a time as you can. And also find someone that is not the obsession, since you'll be finding multiples. Keep chasing non-obsessions. Same idea as Doctor. Build up your stacks. Ignore the obsession completely. And every time you get one of these downs, Search does a number and regresses the gens around you. And if they're still insisting, you could also apply a pop or take this pop elsewhere and use it on a further gen to keep things under control. When allowed to function, this build becomes pretty damn powerful. And is a really, really decent pick for Clown, and a really fun one too, if you're into that. The Clown does begin with some very decent perks. But sorry, before I get into the starting build, I think it's also worth mentioning that Starstruck also has a place in a build like this. Instead of Discordance and Say the Best for Last, you could keep the Pop and the Search, and instead go for Thrill and Tremors and Starstruck. This would allow you to know which gens are being worked on, carry someone there once you down them, and then apply Starstruck on the other survivors. You would need to hurry up quite a little bit to get this insta down, as you don't have too much time, but the Clown is capable of forcing survivors to drop pallets and, chew through their resources. And there's also add-ons that can help you a lot. If you have add-ons to carry extra bottles, you can keep that pressure up. If you have add-ons to find survivors, like the what is it called again? The cigar box, you can use these add-ons to find hiding survivors and instant on them with Starstruck. Now, back to what we were saying. What if we have absolutely no perks on Clown? You're fine. Clown has the very powerful Pop, a very decent choice of Sloppy Butcher. You could bring Noid and Whispers to help you find people throughout the match. This is already a very, very decent build on Clown. You really don't typically need your own perk Bamboozle, as you're pretty good at dealing with windows yourself, but you could also use it if you're into that. Any other perk that you add from other killers will be a treat, but you can start pretty strong with just these. Next up is Spirit. The Spirit, oddly enough, has a similar issue to the Clown. She doesn't have a lot of mobility, she doesn't have a lot of information, she's just very good in the 1v1. But she is way better at the 1v1. And it really goes to show that that's pretty much all you need. With some add-ons, her mobility becomes pretty formidable, but her real strengths are the fact that her 1v1 is extremely powerful, extremely oppressive, and makes even good survivors be at your mercy many, many times. For that reason, have perks to completely overwhelm the survivors and that tell you where to go. I do recommend Ruin Undying, so that you don't have to worry about kicking gens, as well as Search. With these two perks, you are guaranteed to have generators regressing throughout the match with Ruin and Search. And then on top of that, we'll add Surveillance. With Surveillance, you will not always know where to go after a hook, but you will have very good information on your nearby and eventually all the generators around you. And this is particularly good on on Spirit, because you have the ability to know when a survivor gets back on a generator and fake a facing elsewhere, only to reappear behind them and grab them. This is something that you can learn if you watch the video 50 wins in a row with Spirit, that I hopefully have linked up there. I have a little guide there to show you exactly the kind of distance that you should place yourself to really fool survivors and grab them out of generators. Surveillance can help you in that. With great mobility add-ons that make you go very fast, you could also run Barbecue or other information perks. If you want your 1v1s to be even more inescapable, and you are afraid of Iron Will, a very popular survivor perk, you could also run Strider, which would make it extremely, extremely difficult for even Iron Will survivors to dodge you, as their breathing will be louder and their grunts of pain still be audible. If Search is not your cup of tea, you could also go for Sloppy Butcher, which will slow down their healing. Anything that keeps survivors injured or helps you prevent them from healing is typically a very, very decent idea on Spirit. Again, you don't really need a lot of perks on her. If your 1v1 game is on point, you will win most of your games. But for the matches where the survivors are giving you a hard time and the map is not in your favor, this build has got you absolutely covered. As for Ruin and Undying, feel free to replace them with the more consistent but less oppressive Corrupt and Pop. This would also play into your strengths rather well. Then again, what if you have absolutely no perks to start with? The Spirit doesn't need a lot of perks, and her starting ones are very, very decent. Haunted Ground is a little bit predictable on her, however, so I would instead recommend more tracking perks if you're not inclined to use it. Run Haunted Ground by any means. Add Sloppy Butcher, maybe Spies from the Shadows. The nice thing about Spies from the Shadows is that it helps you find survivors even because it triggers even while you're facing. So it might help you a little bit. And you can also have Know It as a bit of a backup. With just some teachable perks from say the Hag, you can already have a very threatening build where they cannot afford to ignore your totems, because eventually they'll have to face with a potential Devour. And then Haunted can also come into the mix, and this is a pretty nasty build already on a killer that can really make it work. That's about it for Spirit. Avoid auto-reading perks on her, since you won't be able to use them while you face. If you bring Amaliers, it can work, but do not expect to be able to read those auras while you're using your power. And also, be very mindful that your add-ons condition a little bit how you're going to play her. If you're going to go for perks like Barbecue and Chili to see from afar, try to bring add-ons for recovery and speed so that you can keep it up. Or else you might not be able to capitalize on those otherwise good perks on Spirit. Next up is Lesion. And Lesion's strength is mainly the fact that they can keep you injured under basically any circumstance. Other killers, they have to outsmart you twice. For a Wraith, for example, most of the times they'll need to ambush you once and then catch you after that. With Lesion, the first hit is basically for free. Use your power smart. If you find a group of survivors, hit one, then hit the other. Try to go for the one that has the highest chance of escaping, and therefore the one that's more corralled, and do it in an order that will secure the most hits. If you see someone that's slightly too far away, no problem. Cancel your power. Now you know they're there. Go there, use your power again, get them injured. Many Legions make the mistake of trying to immediately hit every survivor. You cannot always do that if they keep splitting up and running around. It is totally okay to use your power, hit a couple survivors, and then cancel it until you to go for the third or fourth one. Once you get people injured, you commit to a chase and try to make it as short as possible. Since they're already injured, and your other injured survivors have to mend before they jump on gens, you have a little bit of time, and your chase is only one hit. Make one good mind game, or one good read, or get through a few pallets and corral the survivor, get it down, and then go for the other ones. That's it. That's Legion in a nutshell. You want perks to help you know where to go, and to make it really difficult for survivors to avoid you for long. You do not necessarily want to prevent them from healing. Some people will run Sloppy Butcher, Nurse's Calling on Legion. This is not completely necessary on Legion. If survivors heal, that's totally okay. You will be able to undo their healing very quickly. What you're afraid of as a Legion is a group of survivors that is really good at staying injured. They stay injured, they mend, and they immediately split up on gens. And then one of the survivors that you're chasing gives you a hard time. That is the kind of situation that makes a Legion main begin to sweat a little bit. This is why this build works really well with this. The three main perks of this build are Search, Thrill and Tremors, and Pop. If survivors are injured, that means that they will be injured near the gens they're working. And anytime they go down to an M1, which will be basically always, Search will proc. This punishes survivors for staying injured near gens. If they decide to heal, that's still fine. You will be using your power and they will waste their own time. Once you pick up a survivor, Thrill and Tremors will activate. And this will let you know which gent you have now to worry about. You see a gent or two in the distance, go there with a pop and deliver it. And keep injuring survivors. This is a cycle that you're going to follow. Injure, chase, down, search, pick up, Thrill and Tremors, find survivors and gens, go there, pop it, repeat. Because you're very fast and survivors, because you can catch up to survivors, and they can't really make that much distance, you can pop a gen, and if they go to a part of the map that has a lot of pallets, it doesn't matter. You're still going to be able to injure them. So wasting the time to pop on Legion does not hurt as much as other killers. Against other killers, if you allow a survivor to get a little bit far away, they'll typically make it really hard for you to even get one hit. Whereas with Legion, they'll already be injured, or the first injure, as we said, comes for free. So this is a cycle of perks that plays itself really well. As a fourth perk, you could honestly pick a number of things. My favorite one is Devour Hope. With all those 3 perks, people rarely expect a totem on Legion. If they don't come across it as an accident, people will rarely look for Devour. If they do come across it, well, consider yourself lucky. They spend 15 seconds doing nothing on a totem, and you still have a pretty solid build otherwise. If they don't find it, however, that's where the fun begins. After you get a couple hooks and this perk begins to activate, you will now move 5% quicker after every unhook. This is really good. It's a very minor part of Devour Hope, one that people rarely considered, but one that comes into play a lot. If you're 5% quicker, survivors will typically try to run you as if you were a bit slower, and you will get extra hits and extra downs on out of the injured survivors, thanks to this speed boost very often. And eventually, when you begin to insta-down, healing will become even more useless, survivors will be even more susceptible to the damage that Surge causes, and they will now have to worry about your totem while you are worrying about the gens. Let them do your totem, focus on the gens, even if you have to, and eventually this perk will buy you enough time to win the game very comfortably. Even though this patch is very buggy with pallets, another really good perk choice would be Enduring from the Hillbilly. Enduring allows you to go through pallets without fear. You respect them when you're using your power, and after you hit them, you go through them without fear. If they stun you, they're doing you a favor, because you'll recover immediately and be out of your power, and immediately break the pallet or resume the chase around it. And this can sometimes lead into very hilarious and very positive scenarios for you. You chase a survivor, you hit them at a pallet, they drop it on top of you, and then you immediately are on the same spot as them, and you can immediately grab them with Enduring. Very good perk, will teach you a lot of good habits as Legion. Avaliers is also incredible. If a survivor starts to run early, you can sometimes track them and get the first hit with your power. And it also helps you to do mind games in jungle gyms to hit unsuspecting survivors that are trying to outsmart you, because you see their aura and play around it very well. With other killers, you do this once, and then the perk goes on cooldown, and now you're still in the chase. With Legion, if they're out of the injured, they're down. So Avaliers helps you in that one simple chase that you need to wrap up and can get a game started a lot sooner. Great perk on him. Thanatrophobia is also a safe bet on Legion. You will, more than any other killer in this game, you will consistently get multiple survivors injured. No question about it. And the thing is, because they have to mend, even with good medkits or good perks, survivors will never be able to heal too quickly. So 3 injured survivors that you just hit with your power will be injured for the foreseeable future, at least for the next 30 or 40 seconds, most likely. That means that the 1 survivor that's on a gen, or the 1 or 2 survivors that decide to do gens or do totems, are now slower by 10, 15, 5, 20%, whatever it is. Very consistent value. It can help other slowdown perks be a bit more useful. Ruin also works very well on Legion, but these perks are so consistent that I barely consider running Ruin on my Legion. That being said, if you don't have Surge, another idea that would help quite a lot would be Brutal Strength. With Legion, you will be optimizing the amount of pallets that you get per minute, and Brutal Strength will help you get rid of them. It will also help you to kick gens faster with Pop Goes the Weasel. And since you won't be able to make gens immediately regress when you down someone, and you'll have to kick gens more often, Brutal Strength will give you the value. So if you're looking for a replacement for Surge, Brutal Strength works just fine. And I think it goes without saying, if you want to get extra blood points, although I think Thrill and Tremors might be better, Barbecue is also a very fine replacement in this build or any other in terms of finding survivors. His own perk Discordance is also pretty damn good. Don't take me wrong. So you could run that as well in this slot, and it would help you find survivors early at the start and get multiple hits. A bit predictable on Legion, but still very, very good. And yeah, if you want to slow down the game, Ruin and Undying are always there if you really want to go down that route. If you're just starting out with Legion, however, and you don't have any other perks, you most likely will want to run Discordance. Sloppy Butcher, as I told you, is not a great perk on Legion. It doesn't work when you use your power, but it will work when you hit them with your M1 eventually. And even though it's a subpar choice, eventually when you've hit multiple survivors and they have to heal through Sloppy and then mend, this will probably convince them not to, and will hopefully make it easier for you to get your downs. And on top of that, you could have Bitter Murmur and then Noid as a tracking tool, endgame information, and endgame slap if things get to that. That's the build you could go for, and you could immediately start spicing it up. Lesion, if you make the right decisions and manage to bother survivors well, can be very, very oppressive and very good with just one gen regression perk. So get Clown and Pop, Ruin from Hag, or Search from Demogorgon, and you have already a build to work around, in my opinion. You don't need much else. Just get one of those perks going, maybe multiple if you're so inclined, and you'll have something to work with on Legion. Next up is Plague, and well, this build is ridiculous. The Plague is really, really powerful. You have to think of her as a killer that can delay guaranteed injures. Much like Legion, but with a delay. When you find multiple survivors, you don't try to hit them, you don't try to fully infect them, unless you have a really good chance to do so, or have really strong add-ons that let you do it. You get them all puked on, all infected, and eventually those survivors will be injured, which is great for you. And to avoid being injured, they have to drink from fountains, and if they drink from fountains, or even if they don't, you get to drink from them. And that gives you an incredibly oppressive power, which is the Corrupt Purge. Go watch my Plague guide to understand just how powerful this power is. You need to learn to use this very aggressively. The Plague is basically a more delayed Lesion without her red puke, and a more unforgiving Huntress when she does have it. You want to be a more powerful Huntress as often as you can. So you need to be very, very good at maximizing the effectiveness of those red pukes by forcing them to cleanse, by bringing add-ons, by using your one fountain really, really well. And once you do, your perks are very hard to ignore. This build that I'm going to show you right now, which consists of Discordance, Ruin, Undying, and Retribution, has gotten me 100 wins in a row, 102. And probably might have been even more if I honestly played it right. This build is disgustingly powerful, and really, really, really strong. With Discordance, you'll know where multiple survivors are. It will often trigger at the start of the game. You go right there, you infect the survivors. The survivors run away, doesn't matter. Infect the gen. They want to get on the gen, they'll get infected. They don't want to get on the gen, Ruin will eat up the progress. Lose-lose situation no matter what. Get everybody infected, get them to start cleansing. Once you get your red fountain and you start going absolutely ham, you will 100% pull survivors away from gens and exert insane amount of pressure across the team. They will suffer a lot, and Ruin will eat up their gens. If they're smart, they'll try to do your totems. However, it is a lose-lose situation either way. If they begin to do your totems, the first one will always be Undying. The second one might be Ruin, but it might also just be Retribution. So they might need to do 2 to 3 totems to get through your Ruin, which they desperately need to if you're playing well enough. And every time they do a totem, similar to the Myers build we explained earlier, you get to see everybody. This is way better than Infectious. This is way better than Amaliers, which are perks that are pretty damn good on her, mind you. This is better than even Barbecue, which you could also implement in this build somewhere. It is really, really good. Knowing where everyone is very, very strong. If they're not infected, you quickly go there, just like Legion, infect them a bit. Now they're injured, or they will be in the future. Then go for the other people, now infect them, etc. If you have your red puke available, you just start going ham and down one, down another, and know where the last one is, so you know that you have time to pick up, or you know that you have the ability to slug and go for them. The information that you get from Retribution multiple times is insane. And if they decide not to do your totems at all, I guarantee you will be down on them and pressuring gens in a way that they cannot keep up with. And eventually, you will probably chew right through them. If survivors try to play altruistic around you, your power is very punishing. You can get through health states very quickly, especially with cooldown add-ons. You can hit multiple survivors many times, hit a survivor twice through BT, be very, very unforgiving and really, really force them to have to help each other. That being said, this uses perks from, I think, 4 different killers, so it's a bit of a holy grail. You might not have so many perks available. Can you do something without as many fancy perks? Absolutely. There are some great ideas. You could replace Retribution for Barbecue, and Discordance for her own perk, Corrupt Intervention. And this build would still be fairly decent, fairly good. It would just now work in a slightly different way. The early game would work a little bit different. It would still be pretty damn good. If you only have teachables from yourself, you don't have any other teachables, your build doesn't look quite as good, but it's still very decent. You would be running your own perk, Corrupt Intervention, your own perk, Infectious Fright, which is very top tier, very, very good. Allows you to snowball like crazy when you have your red puke. And then you have, honestly, a bit of a choice as to what to run. In my opinion, I would run Dark Devotion, also her own perk, and Bitter Murmur. Bitter Murmur will give you information throughout the match if they do your gens, and also near the end if you need it. And Dark Devotion can be really powerful. If the Obsession is fully infected and you insta-down them, because they're injured, obviously, you now have 30 seconds of stealth that you can combine with other perks, and it's also quite interesting. If you are afraid that this undetectable is going to undermine Infectious Fright, that's fine. You will still have the terror radius on the obsession, but you could also, if you find Dark Devotion to be too complicated, you could also replace it for something else. Don't go for Sloppy Butcher, since survivors will heal through fountains, but literally any other info perk, such as Spies from the Shadows, Whispers, can work just fine on her. If you only had to go for one DLC on Plague, I think that would be the Clown. With Corrupt and Infectious being already really powerful perks, you could complement this with Pop Goes the Weasel, which would eventually affect those generators that you're patrolling, and Bamboozle, a very decent choice on Plague. When you get your red puke and you can block problematic windows, it makes some maps real slaughterhouses for the survivors. And knowing that you can deal with problematic windows and push them towards pallets that you might be able to get hits on with your puke or, with your normal attacks is never a bad thing. These 2 perks, I think, go well with Plague if you're learning her and have nothing else to go with. Next up, Ghostface. Ghostface reduces his terror radius to nothing and has the ability to insta-down, or just close the gap to the target and go for a normal attack. Ideally, I think you should be looking into insta-downing as soon as you can. You will also be looking into 99ing survivors, stalking them to 99%, and eventually catching them later at a later time where you go to 100 and then insta-down them. So you don't need a lot of insta-down perks on him, although they work well as well if you want to bring them. Oddly enough, Ghostface has a lot of builds that work really well with him. The one I recommend is the following. Corrupt Intervention, Pop Goes the Weasel, Surge, Nurses. Very, very simple stuff. With Corrupt Intervention, you are forcing survivors to come into the middle. Typically, out of the 7 generators, you're blocking 3 of them. There are 4 generators left. Typically, when you spawn, you can have a very, very good idea of which of those 4, which are the 1 or 2 generators that you know for a fact a Survivor or 2 will go to. You can have a very, very good guess and be right 90% of the time. Go to that generator by hugging the edges of the map while you use your stealth and approach from an unexpected angle. As a Ghostface, you have no prop or no tell to the survivors that it's a Ghostface. If you remain undetected until you approach this generator, you could potentially get 1, 2, or maybe 3 survivors all really close to exposed, and then immediately put a huge amount of pressure or grab one of them out of a generator, which would set you up for a really, really good rest of the match if you have such a powerful start of the game. With insta-downs happening here and there, and gens being blocked, that you now only have to worry about 4, Pop is an obvious choice. Although you could very well go for Sloppy Butcher, Ruin, any slowdown perk of your choice would fit rather well in this. Search, I think, is awesome. Goes particularly well if you pair with Surveillance. You could also run Sloppy Butcher here and it would be totally fine. I think Search is incredibly powerful and will give you information. If you're down a survivor and Search procs, you'll know that gens around you are being done. If it doesn't proc, you'll know to worry about other generators. And it goes really well with the ability to insta down. You honestly can do a lot with just Search and Corrupt. And then Nurses is icing on the cake. When survivors are healing each other, you can approach them and down them, or you can approach them and stalk them both. And now if they finish healing, it doesn't matter. They are both potentially insta-down. You can go for one, and then the other one will be a potential insta-down for later. Nurses on Ghostface works tremendously well, better even when you have stronger add-ons. Barbecue is also a decent choice. You could replace Search for Barbecue or Nurses Calling for Barbecue. With Barbecue, similar to Pig, you will see how survivors are moving around the map. And you will be able to use your stealth, ideally with the best add-ons, so you can get it back quicker, the recovery ones, and approach them in a way that makes sense. So you hook a survivor and you see a Claudette go into a generator, then you'll take the extra time to go around and stalk from that building or come from that one angle that they might not expect to have the best chance to get a grab, get an insta-down, or get a cheeky hit. Barbecue works particularly well on this guy. You might not expect it, but insta-down perks are also pretty decent on him. Because he's just good at using his stealth to approach survivors, you might find some success in using them. One of the builds that I went for that worked really well was Discordance. I used this one to get 50 wins in a row with him. Discordance and Search to constantly find multiple survivors and harass the gens around them. And then Undying and Devour Hope. By the time I already have exposed a few of them, and the time I've already done a few of them, and the time that they're starting to get smart and play around my abilities, Devour Hope typically kicked in. And then I would focus on being more aggressive and getting those insta-downs with Devour. And then they would have to cleanse it, but they would also have to go through Undying first, since it protects Devour Hope. And it is a pretty effective build that really makes up for having no add-ons if you want to try. If you're starting with absolutely zero perks on your stabby mass boy, you do have some decent perks that are almost enough to keep generators at bay. You have his very decent Trail and Tremors, will block away gens that are not being worked on so that you know where to go. Sloppy works wonders on him. If you don't have Corrupt Intervention, Whispers is a very good choice. At the start of the game, go through the edge of the map, and when Whispers turns on, start paying attention and see which survivors you're going to bump into. They will most likely be looking at the center of the map and not at the edges, and you can sometimes find a survivor crawling or hiding or doing chests or doing bones or doing a gen and get a very good start with Whispers. Not to mention that it also helps you later throughout the match to find healing people, hiding people, the last survivor when they're trying to get to the exit, and so on. And your final perk can be All Ears. All Ears helps you get a hit in a prolonged chase, helps you understand when a survivor is breaking away from a loop. And if you've already marked a survivor and you have a limited time to insta-down them, and you want to take the risk, with All Ears, it might be worth it because that information and your ability to crouch, hide your red glow with your power and so on, along with All Ears, can be really strong. You might, however, also decide to bring Noed if you just want to have a little backup and safety perk at the end of the game, if you think it might come to that. But these are very decent perks. You will need to play really well because you don't have a lot to slow on generators. You just need to apply the pressure yourself. As long as you get one of the perks to do that, Ruin, Pop, Search, you will start to do a lot better. I would recommend that Pop is perhaps the more consistent one. But both Ruin and Search are also very decent on him. Next up is Demogorgon, who's having a spicy rework in the future that's going to change up how he plays a little bit. I still reckon that this build will be decent, but with some of the upcoming add-ons, you'll see that Save the Best for Last is going to be perhaps less of a choice, since his shred will have a built-in Save the Best for Last of sorts. Still, a build that you cannot go wrong with. Ruin, Undying, Save the Best for Last, Tinkerer. Ruin Undying to slow on the game, save the best for last. Every time you find non-obsessions, you hit them as much as you can, and you'll be able to eventually go into M1 and then shred very, very quickly. Of course, going through pallets very fast with your shred. And Tinkerer will let you know which yen is being done so that you can go there, catch them by surprise, or even use your portals. Alternatives to this, which are totally fine, you could run, instead of Ruin Undying, Corrupt and Pop for a similar idea. Block away the further generators, maybe have a bit more time to set up some portals at the start, and then pop gems when they're about to be done. You could run Tinkerer or switch it out for Barbecue, which would also be totally appropriate. And if you're not a huge fan of Save the Best for Last, I'm All Ears is also a very, very decent choice on him, as well as Enduring if you value aggressive playstyles. And any combination of add-ons that are coming might completely replace this aggressive perk to help you in chase. We will have new add-ons to recover faster from breaking pallets, and new add-ons to recover faster from shredding successfully. So instead, you might reserve this perk slot for something else. Other hexes can also be considered. Don't forget though that your shred is a special attack. It will not apply sloppy. It will not apply surge. So that's a bit of a shame. But don't be discouraged from using those perks if you got nothing else. Now, I would recommend, if you have nothing else, to use Surge, Mindbreaker, Sloppy Butcher, and probably Noid if we're being realistic. These perks will force you to be a bit of an M1 creature, because you'll need M1s to proc Surge, Sloppy, but you can still use your power to finish off targets when they've already been applied with Sloppy, or when they're going through windows and you absolutely have to, or just to get rid of pallets. This is still a very adequate build, and you have some gen slowdown, which is more than some other killers can say. Some DLCs that you could look forward to. If you buy the Pig DLC, Surge and Surveillance are a great combination. You could even add Make Your Choice as a way to constantly keep survivors on their toes if you teleport back to hooks. And this wouldn't be a crazy idea. You can do some damage with this. More likely though, you'll probably want to go for Clown so that you can use Pop and perhaps Bamboozle, or even hack with the ever-present, all-powerful Ruin and even Devour. Don't forget that this killer is very good at protecting Devour and totems in general. You could have a portal next to a totem, and you could constantly check your power to know if survivors are doing your totem, and then teleport there. And if you have the Lifeguard Whistle, which is going to be an upcoming add-on, you can check on your totem passively. So Lifeguard Whistle with something like Devour would be really, really, really strong. You could even use Undying and Devour, protect one of the totems, and eventually they would have to deal with one of them, and that one totem you would have defended, whichever one you could defend better. Strong options for Demogorgon. His add-ons will really, really spice things up quite a little bit. So I look forward to that when that change comes in the live version of the game very, very soon. For Oni, I think you want to go a similar route as some of the other killers and bring Ruin Pop, which is the plan A, plan B sort of deal. If you are getting downs and you can create the pressure while Ruin is up, great. Gens go back to nothing. If they get your Ruin, well, not too bad. You still have Pop. And with the other two perks, Discordance and Tinkerer, you will know where to deliver these pops. Discordance will let you know where multiple survivors are. One of them is hiding behind a tree. Great, you know they're there because of Discordance. Get that hit. Two of them go for a loop, but one of them is a bit more out of position. Hit them. Finding multiple survivors increases your chances of getting to at least one of them that is not so well placed. And that first hit on Oni is everything. At the start of the match, Discordance can really help, and throughout the match, it will let you know what's going on and whether or not you need to hurry up for the Tinkerer or you're going to make it there in time. Tinkerer will let you know when a gen is about to pop. You can go there and place a pop, goes the Weasel, or bother them with Ruin, and it will also let you know, okay, this is the time to use your power. be careful about it, but these two perks will give you a lot of information, and they're very reliable, and survivors, for the most part, cannot really play around them too much. These two perks work no matter what, cannot really be fooled if you're on top of things. This is a build that's a bit overkill, assuming that you don't have a lot of add-ons. If you do have a lot of add-ons to stay in the fight and make you get your power quicker, you might not need such heavy artillery. You might focus on a more aggressive build that instead of the stealth from Tinkerer, makes use of the information from a perk such as Infectious Fright. So such a build would look a little bit different. You could run Ruin and Undying, completely forget about Pop, and then have something like Barbecue and Chili for the information and Infectious Fright. Every time you down a survivor, any other survivor nearby will be exposed. And because you have the add-ons to stay in your power and use it more effectively, you will have a better chance to get those multiple downs. This would still be a very powerful build. And if you don't like Ruin and Undying, Corrupt and Pop would still work just fine. You could also alternatively consider dropping Corrupt Intervention for Monitor and Abuse. This perk will make your territory smaller, will give you a better chance to sneak up to survivors. And of course, when you're already in chase and you down someone, it will make your terrorists even bigger, which means that Infectious Fright will detect people from even further. Other killers, when they detect people from very far away, they typically cannot do much about it. The Oni is perhaps the best killer at catching up to a survivor that's within that range. With your Demon Dash, you really can go very far very quickly, regardless of the obstacles. So that's awesome. Infectious Fright works particularly well on him. If you're starting out with Oni, however, and you don't have a lot of perks, well, that sucks. His perks are not that great. Sanshin Tactics is a decent choice for beginners. It will teach you what to look out for and tell you cues about the map. Never a bad choice for beginners. Blood Echo, you might as well run it. You can put it with Sloppy Butcher. Sloppy Butcher will not trigger with your power, but every time you hit a survivor with your katana, they will have a harder time healing. The more time they take to heal, the higher the chances that you use that you use Blood Echo. And if they are affected by Blood Echo, they will be exhausted. They're dead hard. They're sprint burst. They won't be able to use it for a little while, which is awesome. And then, of course, your final perk could be something like Whispers, Bitter Murmur, anything to help you understand where the survivors are at any given time, near the end of the match with Whispers, maybe after they do a gen with Bitter Murmur, and so on. If you only can afford one DLC, I recommend you go for Plague. Plague will give you Infectious, which will help you use your power, which is awesome, and Corrupt, which will help you slow down survivors at the start until you get one hit and get the blood flowing and get your power started. So that should be your number one priority, probably as an Oni. But you'll do great things with him, I am sure. Next up is Deathslinger. Deathslinger is a bit like Clown in the sense that he's very, very, very oppressive in the 1v1. Even more so than Clown. The first hit is very easy. Even if a survivor is behind cover, as long as you can see them, you can usually shoot them. And this will result in, at the very least, you breaking the chain and getting them injured. Getting them down is a little bit more difficult, but still, this is a killer that has a really, really good shot, no pun intended, to down even really good survivors almost anywhere, as long as they're within shooting distance. Very, very scary stuff. Unfortunately, his ability to pressure multiple survivors isn't really there. Unlike Huntress or Plague, he needs to reload after every shot. He's rather slow, and he doesn't have the ability to injure multiple survivors very quickly in any significant way. Be smart about how you use your power. If you shoot a survivor and break the chain, and then shoot another survivor and hit them and they're both mending, if one of them has already finished mending, go for that person. Let the other person mend. Try to maximize the slowdown that you do, forcing them to mend as much as possible so that you slow down the survivors as much as you can before you get that first down. That's the difficult part about this killer. You have a hard time creating pressure if survivors are smart and they spread out, and particularly if you miss a few shots or if they're very smart and make it very difficult for you to land the final blow. This is where this build that we're going to discuss really shines. We have Ruin, which is our plan A. and Search, which is our plan A.2. If we have Ruin up, Search will still fit through gens. If we don't, no biggie. We'll still be able to regress them with Search. And then we have a similar combo as Hag, Agitation, and Starstruck. These two perks are fucking great together. With Agitation, we bring our terror radius from 24 meters to 36. That's a lot. And we can go very fast and immediately cover halfway across the map and hook a survivor next to a gen that's being done, or next to a gen we think is being done. Any survivor within that area is now Starstruck. And for the next 30 seconds or so, if you catch them and you hit them, they're gonna go down. You immediately cover several of your weaknesses. Instead of having to create pressure by shooting multiple survivors and juggling them kind of like Legion, which is very hard to do, you now focus on what you're good at, the 1v1, and then make it so that the next 1v1 is even shorter. With insta-downs coming in, Search applies more and more, and if they don't find Ruin, this can really make a game go by very, very quickly. If the survivors refuse to heal, then you're already playing with an advantage because they'll just be one good shot away from being down. This is a very, very strong build. If you want to be guided as to where to go, you could replace Ruin and give up its benefit for Thrilling Tremors. And every time you pick up, you will know where to go because Thrilling Tremors will let you know which gens are not being occupied. And you can go there very fast with Agitation. This is a build I've used to a reasonable degree of success. Or perhaps you will want to give up Search instead for such a benefit. Either way, really good stuff. Starstruck works like an absolute charm on this killer. If Starstruck ever gets nerfed or it's not your cup of tea, an alternative would be to run the very basic Ruin, Undying, Sloppy Butcher. Don't forget that they have to mend with this killer, so it will be slower healing and mending, which is always great. Even good medkits will still take a while. Sloppy, as well as, say, something such as Barbecue to keep an eye on survivors. Since you have a smaller terror radius, you can creep up to them. You could also pick Surveillance, Search, other perks to complement your playstyle and the rest of the build. And that could go quite alright. If you're starting with absolutely nothing as a Deathslinger, it's really not the end of the world. You can still do all right. You have the very basic combination of Gearhead and Sloppy Butcher. You will slow down their healing, hopefully make them mend a bunch. And every time you get M1s, you will maybe see generators being done, so you'll know where to go next. If you're a bit too late for the generators, you will complement this with Bitter Murmur. Seeing the aura might help you with your shots and will also help you at the very end. And if it does come to get into the very end, you have Noid. On a killer that can shoot and reel you in, it's quite powerful stuff. So that's what build you should be aiming for at the very start. I would say that if you can only choose one DLC to go for, the Hag, as usual, is your best friend. The Devour Hope on this killer is very, very powerful, and so is Ruin. Those two together, with perhaps Retribution, his own perk, could really give a lot of trouble. So you could have Hex, Ruin, Devour, Retribution, and then perhaps Sloppy Butcher. And you would have guaranteed pressure on the gens, perhaps insta-down, and if they begin to do your totems, collective information, as well as heal slowdown. You almost have everything going with a very simple build that you can get as fast as you get the teachables from the Hag on this shooty cowboy. That's what you should go for, and I wish you the best of luck on this Slinger. Next up is Executioner. Executioner is a bit of a different creature from the last time we saw him. Namely, he's a bit slower at putting down his trail. And his ability to fake out hits and use his punishment really quick, that's all been corrected. He can no longer go from punishment to M1. What do you have in return, though? A killer that can still get a hit basically in any loop in the game. If you're good or lucky, this killer can hit survivors, even the best ones, basically anywhere. And if you're very lucky, you can do it twice and down them immediately. Very powerful stuff. Unfortunately, the nature of his special hooks, his cages, completely disregards all hooking perks. Barbecue and chili, Pop Goes the Weasel, Make Your Choice, typical hook-related perks do not work on this killer. And unless you're going for a very forced build or have some kind of archive, I don't recommend you try to make them work. In my personal experience, use your cages. They are part of your power. Use them. Don't ignore them just to satisfy your urge to use certain perks. For that reason, the build I recommend now is still really, really powerful. I used it back then and it still works like a charm. Ruin Undying. You have a Ruin forever. No Surge, nothing that requires M1s, no Pop, nothing that requires hooks. And then you have the powerful Discordance, which will let you know where multiple people are, and Tinkerer. Tinkerer on this killer is particularly wicked, because if you get close to a gen and you're stealthy, you can sometimes use your range attack to hit through walls and hit one or multiple survivors that are very close to a gen, that are listening to the noise, that are not aware that you're that close. So particularly good on this killer. And with Discordance, you'll have plenty of information about which gens are being done. You could absolutely switch up this build around. Popular perks for this killer include I'm All Ears. I think Sanchin Tactics is quite nice on him to learn the layout of the map and know where to aim if you suspect survivors will try to use certain pallets or windows out of view. And Corrupt Intervention is also a perk that slows down gens without you having to hook. So it's also a decent choice, and it alone can help you get started. That's basically what I would go for this killer. If you don't mind, I'm going to check my notes real quick. I'll make sure I didn't forget anything. And if I were to have absolutely nothing when I started with this killer, if I were to start with no teachables, I would probably want to go with Whispers. Whispers is really useful on this killer. If you ever send someone on a cage and it goes off, you know that there's no one else around them, and you should probably go immediately to the opposite end of the map. Helps you at the start, as usual. Sloppy Butcher is not ideal. You don't really get value out of it if you use your power to hit survivors. But eventually you will hit them with your M1. Eventually you will. So Sloppy Butcher is a fine choice. And then you could have the combination, the final combination of Trail of Torment. A bit of a predictable perk, but on this killer, but still a powerful one. You kick a generator, you become stealthy for a little while, can lead to some unexpected plays from your part, and then have the endgame trump card of Noid, which is fine and very, very unforgiving. A survivor that you catch off guard with Noid, you could very potentially immediately chop if they're already on their dead hook and they're tormented, and then go for someone else. So you could do a lot of last minute endgame damage with Noid. If I were to have one DLC for this killer, I think Infectious Fright and Corrupt from Plague are too good. Get the Plague and you'll have Infectious, which is a very decent perk on this killer. You down a survivor, they're tormented, someone screams, send them off, and you know exactly who to go for next. And Corrupt, which, as we mentioned, works like a charm for this killer since it doesn't involve hooks and you get to use it perfectly fine. Use those two perks with, say, Sloppy and Noid, for example, and you have a decent enough build going for you. Next up is Blight, and the build I recommend on him is also extremely wicked, and I would have not in a million years gone for a build like this had I not seen it work. I've tried this build, and it is stupidly effective. You focus on the one thing you're good at, being very fast and really stupid and really ridiculous, and getting downs, and eventually these perks will overwhelm survivors in a way that's really hard to describe. My friend Mimi Echo has gotten over 150 wins in a row with this ridiculous build. Now, Ruin and Undying are pretty classic, very good on Blight for obvious reasons. You have a very overwhelming presence. Typically, you would see this build alongside Barbecue to help you track survivors after a hook, and Tinkerer to help you know when to get back to a hook and harass it. And that would be okay. But Devour Hope and Haunted Ground are also really, really tough perks. Even though you don't insta-down survivors with your attack, you still have the threat of slowing them down when they're trying to go for Ruin to get Haunted Grounds. Now you can zone them out, interrupt the survivor that was going for a rescue, maybe get an insta-down even if you get rid of a pallet or two. And Devour Hope, again, even though you don't insta-down, you still benefit from the 5% extra speed that you get after 2 tokens, and you can still threaten to mori them eventually, which is tremendously bad for survivors and they need to desperately avoid. So with this build, they'll typically, if you're good enough to do it early, they'll typically notice that that you have totems, maybe do 1 or 2, eventually realize that you have Devour Hope. The team in its entirety will scramble up and try to find totems, and this is where things can go horribly wrong. They can do Haunted Ground, and then Haunted Ground will reappear, and then they can do Haunted Ground again, and then they'll get ruined, but you still have Devour. Or they'll do your Devour, but at that point, you will have so many downs, and the gens will be so devastated by Ruin that it won't even matter. You're basically throwing many things at a wall and hoping that some of them stick. And more often than not, if you're good enough at Blight and you don't overthink it and you just focus on the normal chases, it will definitely stick and it will definitely work out. For a more gentleman build without hexes, you could go for something such as the aforementioned Tinkerer and Barbecue. And you could also put on Pop and Oppression from the Twins. These 2 perks will make your kicks have a little bit more oomph behind them. A gen that you kick after a hook will lose some progress. And if there's other gens around the map, they will begin to regress. And if survivors are there, they'll get a skill check that's difficult. And if they miss it, you will get a notification. And as a killer that can move around the map very, very quickly, that's awesome because you can be there in 2 seconds just like Hillbilly. Maybe even better than Hillbilly sometimes. And be there to cause some trouble and get into your next chase. Decent build. If you start with absolutely nothing, that's a bit tricky. You could go for something such as Sloppy Butcher and Dragon's Grip. If there's ever a generator that's really contested, you can kick it, and survivors that touch it will now be exposed and will go down in 1 hit. And then if you insta-down them, you'll also be applying Sloppy, which you won't apply with your cane, but it will also come in hand. And then at the end of the game and throughout the match, you have Bitter Murmur information and know it as a bit of a backup. Nothing too crazy, but you don't really need a lot on Blight. Just get one of these very threatening perks from Hag, from Clown, Pop, and maybe a little bit of information to go along with it. Tinkerer from Billy, Barbecue from Cannibal, and you have a very solid build on the way. Next up is Twins. On Twins, Corrupt Intervention is an idea, although I personally favor Discordance. Discordance works even from the Victor point of view. With Victor, many of your other perks don't really help you. They are disabled, you don't see them. If you have Nurses Calling, for example, you won't see that from Victor. But Discordance still makes a noise, and if you are paying attention, you will still notice it. So it's a perk that works even when you're controlling Victor, and a perk that can tell you where to go to bother multiple survivors, which is the Twins, is everything you could hope for. If you know survivors are on a certain gen, what I like to do is to set up an ambush. Get a little bit close with Charlotte, drop Victor out, have Victor approach that gen. With 2 people, there's a very good chance, and without a heartbeat approaching, there's a very good chance that the survivors will think that you're on someone else, they won't let go of the gen, and you will be there with Victor and find 1 or 2 of them, maybe even more. Immediately try to grab onto one of the survivors, pay attention to where he's going, and then when you switch back to Charlotte immediately, go and try to harass that survivor, come from an angle that they won't expect, or hit some of the other ones and enjoy some of the chaos that you're creating. With Ruin Undying, they'll have to go through several totems to get rid of your very oppressive slowdown. And with Barbecue, you get a little bit of information to go around the map. Some Twins that favor heavy slugging sometimes opt to run Deerstalker, which is a decent perk if you're going for massive amounts of slugging. But don't forget, the Twins are getting a nerf where if it comes down, it was a bit buggy in the PTB that we have going, but if gets applied as the developers intended, and I'm sure it will, slugging repeatedly with the twins is going to be a little bit harder and harder. So this is a playstyle that you should probably not indulge in for much longer anyway. So Deerstalker you can consider, but understand that will probably go away with time. And you could also use other perks, but do consider that when Victor is in play, many of the perks don't really work on him. So if you want to have effects such as, for example, dropping survivor items, you can use that with the spinning top add-on, for example. A very safe choice, and one that you can use from moment number 1 is Sloppy Butcher. Healing slower, and you'll eventually get hits from Charlotte, is a really good thing for the twins. And it also applies when survivors are on the ground and they're trying to pick each other up, which is a fairly common situation for the twins. Now, you could build a more classic build out of some of these perk suggestions. Corrupt, Pop, Sloppy, Barbecue is one of the builds that you can suggest. We've gone over this one very simply. Instead of ambushing multiple survivors, you just now make them flock towards you, fewer gens to defend. You just pop to keep them under control. Barbecue to see people from afar, maybe even consider sending Victor. If you know they're injured and you can track blood, send Victor in and you'll eventually track them, down them, leave them there for a little bit, tend to your business around, try to be 2 places at once. If Victor now detects someone else, you can switch back, maybe try to hit them, and so on. And Sloppy, as we said, helps to slow down things a little bit. These two are also fantastic users of Devour Hope. So you can implement Devour Hope, and I really recommend you consider Hag, because Ruin and Devour are great, individually or together. And you can use Victor to defend Devour Hope to a scarily effective degree. That being said, if you have absolutely nothing on twins, don't worry, you can still use their fairly oppressive power to a great extent. You don't absolutely need your perks if you play your cards right. I recommend that you go for Coup de Grace, their own perk, as well as Oppression. And you could either go for Sloppy or Deerstalker, depending on your playstyle, and maybe Annoy it at the end. If you set off one of those 2 perks and you want to have a bit of a backup for the end. With Coup de Grace, every time they finish a gen, you will have a slightly extended launch, and that can sometimes be really helpful to get that injured or get that down. And unfortunately, Oppression by itself is not that effective, but it can help you keep the game under control for a little bit, or maybe even give you some information in a clutch moment where a generator is being done across the map and somebody gets a skill check, they fail, and you know more or less what's going on, and you have just a little bit more information to go on. Probably you'll be looking at getting the Hag, as we said, for the Ruin and Devour Hope strats, but other perks from other killers are also very valuable, so go nuts with them. And finally we get to Trickster, and unfortunately Trickster, even though he's a fairly unique character, benefits from the most basic strats and perks, I'm afraid. You'll see that the build I recommend on him consists of Corrupt Intervention, Ruin, Undying, and Tinker. It's basically the same build that we recommended for Freddy, for different reasons, however. The Trickster is mostly a killer that excels in downing a single target. He doesn't handle multiple targets all that well. And is maybe better than other killers at downing them in certain places where he can throw knives continuously. You will rarely have the ability to down multiple survivors in very short succession, like Huntress can do, or Cannibal can do if given the opportunity. You will rarely have the opportunity to go on extremely short chases and snowball the game, because you also have to reload your power, and you're a 110 killer. You don't have the ability to go on continued chases and down a survivor, down another, and still have a good grasp on the game before they start getting back up. For that reason, you're looking at slowing the game down as much as you humanly can, And having the perks that will help you make the right decisions and know when you're committing too much and force them to be as slowed down as possible and to deal with the perks as much as possible. These perks can totally fall flat if your chases are taking too long and you're at the wrong places. So by all means, try to, even though you cannot deal with multiple survivors and down them, you can still bother them. So try to use this build in a way that will bother as many of them as you possibly can. He's out of the small terror radius with a unique music. Also means that he's a decent user of monitor and abuse. You could forget about Ruin and Undying and run something a bit more classic, such as Corrupt, which would still help. Pop Goes a Weasel, Barbecue and Chili, and Monitor and Abuse. With Barbecue and Chili, you would have good information every time you hook someone, and you would creep up to them with a mere 60-meter terror radius, which would be pretty damn good. By the time they hear you, you might start pelting them with knives. And Barbecue would help you know where they are, maybe even catch them in the open if they're healing, and interrupt them before they finish whatever it is they're doing. And with the reduced amount of generators to worry about with Corrupt, you might have a better chance to hit those pops on the gens that are next to you. And that's basically it. Luckily, this killer, even though he has better perks, comes with some very decent perks. So if you have absolutely nothing on Trickster, go nuts on his teachable perks. They're pretty damn good. Crowd Control will give you a decent ability to shut down some loops. If survivors fastball through them, they won't be able to use that anymore against you. And until they deal with that, it is a decent tool to have in chase. Then you can use his own perk, No Way Out, to stall survivors at the end of the game. Once the survivors are stalled, you will be able to see where they are with the Bitter Murmur, which will let you know where everybody is at the end. It will also help you a little bit throughout the match, giving you some idea of where they're going. And even if you're out of knives and you're a bit on your last ditch effort to catch survivors, the 4% movement speed from Noid can help you to catch up to a survivor and insta-down them. Starstruck, his own perk, not so good on himself, as he cannot get close for the M1 as easily as other faster killers, right? But Noid, near the end, if you have nothing else, perfectly good choice. Might make it a little bit easier to guarantee a good outcome. Run this with some of the better add-ons, such as the USB stick to require one fewer knife, and extra knife pouches, whatever it is you find useful, and you'll probably have an easier time playing a killer that is kind of hard to get into. If I could only run perks from one DLC and I had to pick, I would probably go for Plague. With Plague, you could run something such as Corrupt Intervention, Infectious Fright, and then No Way Out and Know It. With Know It, when you begin to insta-down people at the end of the game, Infectious Fright will reveal other people, which might help you get multiple downs before the exit gates become unblocked with No Way Out. With Corrupt, you will have some slowdown at the start until you get into your first chases. And Infectious Fright throughout the match can also help you. If you're not a survivor and somebody screams next to you and you have your main event, you might decide to go for that survivor that was hiding and try to use your special ability to get a health set or two out of them. That alone would probably make this killer a little bit more bearable. So that's the kind of DLC I would probably aim for. And hopefully with that, we've been going for 2.5 hours. I still feel like I could probably go into a lot more detail and give you a lot more alternatives. But I've really tried my best to cover all of these killers and tell you what I know about them. I hope you find this video useful. I noticed that many of these perks that I explained have a lot more to them. By all means, go check out my video where I explain all the perks, or wait until I make a new version of it, or check the wiki. And don't forget that in the description, I'll have an up-to-date spreadsheet. If any of the information that you see in this video becomes outdated because you're watching a little while after I upload it, go check out the link in the description. You'll find a spreadsheet there that I make an effort to keep up to date, so that you can see if this builds my recommendations or any new perks that come out that might be very, very good on the kill you're interested in. So by all means, check that out. And thank you very much for watching. I hope you find it very useful. Mwah.